Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. Happy Snake Day. We actually are going to learn it's like snake cubed, but we'll learn more.
Snakes. Yes, yeah, very exciting.
Exactly. You know, people are really scared of snakes. A lot of them. You either love them or you hate them. We were talking about this before we started. But they're really beneficial to us.
Yeah, they're such a big part of our environment and ecosystem, even if we don't really think about them maybe all the time. But I know that
Like
they
them.
startle you if you
Yeah.
do encounter them. But they really play some very critical and important roles in our environment. And we're fortunate today to have Dr. Steve Price with us. Dr. Price is actually our current acting chair here in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. So he's done a great job with that. But he's taken a little sideline from that to help us out today with a great presentation all about snakes. You know, as Renee mentioned, it is National Snake Day today, which is part of International Snake Week and the year of the snake, right? So it's about as much snake as you can get in one day. So we're going to go deep dive into snakes. Dr. Price got a great presentation for us. And then we'll hear from Laurie Thomas. She's got a brand new Tree of the Week with us. So great show today. As always, if you have questions for either of our presenters, please use the chat function. We can interact with you that way. If you are a YouTube viewer or a podcast listener, thank you. But we can interact with you via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu. I'm glad to have you all with us today. Renee, glad to be with you. And Dr. Price, welcome back to From the Woods Today.
Thank you so much for joining us. And you know, you were telling us right before the show, it's like snake cubed out there for this time of year. You know, as far as day, week, year. You know, I was like, wow, I didn't realize all that when I asked you just to come on to do a Snake Day, which is today, right?
It is today. Yes, it is. Yeah. So it's very exciting. It's a big year for snakes.
I see that.
Big day, big
huge.
week, big year. So
yeah, they're one of our popular things that we get a lot of traffic on is our snake website here out of our department as well. So they're always kind of popular. So yeah.
You know, a common misconception that we have, a lot of people will say, "Oh, that snake is poisonous."
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I have learned from working here that that's not the right terminology for a snake. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. Snakes, animals that are poisonous would mean like if you were to eat that animal, you would get sick, right? They have poisons in their body, they produce some toxins. Snakes are venomous. That means they use an injected toxin. And so, we use the term venomous for snakes, and we use the term poisonous for, some amphibians and insects and things like that.
Okay. All right. Awesome. I just wanted to clear that up so people could be like, okay, I know I need to say venomous now.
So I hear it all the time.
Yeah, we're looking forward to your presentation. If you want to, you can go ahead and get started.
I'll go ahead and share it. Okay. Well, happy Snake Day. This is Snake Appreciation Day. Like Billy and Renee said, I'm Steve Price. I teach herpetology here at UK. I'm very excited about teaching that course, the study of reptiles and amphibians, to both our undergraduate and graduate students. And I'm super excited today to talk to you about snakes and ways in which we can appreciate them. So for those of you who are not familiar with World Snake Day, it is today, July 16th. And this provides an opportunity to celebrate snakes and really raise awareness about snakes, their preservation, their conservation, just how cool they are. And so when it comes to snakes, just like a lot of other wildlife, they're threatened by a wide variety of different things like habitat loss and disease. But with snakes, it's a little bit trickier because oftentimes people have pretty negative attitudes towards snakes, and that oftentimes is a pretty significant barrier to their conservation. So my goal today is kind of maybe change some of those attitudes that you might have about snakes. And as Renee and Billy also said, this is the week of the snake too. And there's all kinds of cool events. If you go to snakeweek.org.events, there's some really high profile, like guest speakers in the snake world, high profile speakers that are giving talks about snakes. I believe most of these events are free that you can check out. And it's also the year of the snake in the Chinese calendar. And so lots of snake stuff going on this year. All right. So let's quickly talk here and just define what a snake is. Um, so snakes are vertebrates, right? Similar to amphibians, fish, mammals, birds. Snakes are considered tetrapods, even though they don't have limbs, okay? Um, and snakes are considered amniotes. That means they have an amniotic egg that has these extra embryonic membranes that we see in birds and mammals. Amphibians don't have these extra embryonic membranes, and fish don't either. Okay, amphibians and reptiles like snakes are oftentimes taught together. Of course, I teach the class and treated together, but they're actually very different and not very closely related animals. As you can see from this diagram, snakes, like all reptiles, are very closely related to birds. In fact, snakes and all reptiles are more closely related to mammals than they are amphibians. We break this down a little bit further, and I know there's some technical terms on here, and we're just looking kind of at the reptile aspect of the tree. We call that diapsids. There's kind of two major groups, the archosaurs and lepidosaurs. The archosaurs include things like turtles, crocodilians, and birds, and dinosaurs. Lepidosaurs includes snakes and lizards. And this outgroup called the Tuatara, which are some reptiles found off of islands off New Zealand. Okay, so snakes and lizards are very closely related together. So much so that they're considered in the same order, Squamata. Okay, now some folks, depending on your interest in taxonomy, will further break down the suborder called Serpentes. That includes all snakes, and this includes all 23 families of snakes, and it has over 4,000 different species of snakes. Now, snakes are found globally, except Antarctica. It's too cold there for snakes, but we find them, in boreal regions, and of course, a lot of diversity in the tropics, but really find snakes kind of everywhere that isn't too chilly for these animals. Okay. So, what is a snake? Okay. So, I think that the first thing we should just acknowledge is these are limbless, elongate reptiles, right? And snakes lack eyelids. Snakes lack external ears as well. As you can see in this picture of the corn snake here, there's no ear opening. And so snakes can't close their eyes either. So when a snake's sleeping, its eyes are open. This eye is protected by a clear scale. And oftentimes people see this when a snake is like ready to shed its skin, that clear scale gets a little bluish on it. And that's just kind of that scale pulling away and a new scale developing underneath it. Okay. I just put this comparison up here because we do have some lizards that are limbless. Okay, this is a legless lizard, slender glass lizard that we can find here in Kentucky. And if you look very carefully, you can see an external ear opening. And if you were to kind of harass this animal, it'd be able to close its eyes, right? So that differentiates snakes from lizards. All right. Now, snakes have paired organs throughout their body. But they're a little bit different shape than what we would expect to see in like a mammal. And we don't have to go through the whole internal anatomy of a snake. But one thing that's really interesting about snakes is they usually have one lung, either the left or the right lung, that's much longer than the other one. And in this diagram here, we can see that this is the right lung, and see how long it is, travels down almost half that body of the snake. We can look at the left lung and it's really small. Now, why don't they have two big, long lungs? Well, it's because a snake essentially has to fit all of its organs in this linear system. I think I like to refer to it as like, basically you're fitting all this stuff in an animal that's like a hot dog shape, right? So you have these elongate organs that we see in snakes. Okay. Um, Snakes can lay eggs. Some species lay eggs, and the young develop in eggs, like this gray rat snake. And these eggs usually take a couple months, maybe 10 weeks to hatch, and then the young snakes emerge from these eggs. But they can also have a different reproductive strategy depending on the species. and they can give birth to live young. So we'd refer to this as viviparous, where they're live bearing. So basically the mother carries around these developing embryos inside of her body. And usually, at least in this part of the country, we start seeing this in August and September, the mother will give birth to live young. So kind of two different reproductive styles we see in snakes. Giving birth to live young is actually pretty common here in Kentucky. And this is just showing you some different live bearing species. Here we have everything from copperheads to cottonmouths to timber rattlesnakes, all give birth to live young. So oftentimes I get phone calls from people or pictures from people showing me a nest that looks like snake eggs. And they say, this is a nest of copperheads. Well, copperheads don't lay eggs, so it has to be from a non-venomous species that would lay eggs like a rat snake. But all our water snakes give birth to live young. A lot of their relatives, like garter snakes, give birth to live young as well. Snakes have recurved, kind of specialized teeth. Okay, so this is some diagrams of some python skulls here. You can see the size of these teeth, and these teeth allow them to grasp on to prey, okay, and kind of hold on to it. These teeth don't allow the snakes to kind of process that food item in their mouth. So of course, snakes tend to swallow things whole. And if you've ever seen a snake that has recently swallowed something, you see this big bulge in the body. And then the food item then is processed, in the snake's stomach and things like that and broken down, okay? So this is a little gray rat snake here eating a gray tree frog. And of course, we all know snakes are capable of taking some pretty large food items. Here's a rat snake consuming a squirrel. And if we go back to this kind of skull image here, these snakes kind of have these modified jaws that allow them to kind of really, and if this were a live animal, you'd see some ligaments here and things like that, but allow them to really spread out their mouth so they can swallow pretty large prey items, okay? Now, some species of snakes, particularly venomous ones, have modified teeth. You can see these modified teeth here in this pit viper, and those modified teeth allow them to inject venom into their prey, which starts the digestive process, but also is a really safe way for these snakes to capture and eat prey. Because if you remember, snakes don't have arms or limbs. It's hard for them to hold on to prey. So any way they can capture prey without having to actually go to battle with that prey item is really advantageous for the snake, okay? All snakes are carnivores. That means they eat other animals. Okay, so this great rat snake here is consuming this, but it's not just mammals that they eat. They eat birds, they eat amphibians. We have lots of snakes that eat invertebrates, and I'll kind of talk about diets here in a minute. So I wanted to spend some time talking about some really cool aspects of snakes that maybe some of you are unfamiliar about, okay? Now, snakes have a very strong sense of smell, and it's their primary way of detecting prey or finding, males finding females, females finding males, and just sensing their environment. In fact, a snake's sense of smell is more powerful than that of a bloodhound's. And you notice that if you've seen a snake kind of flicking its tongue, they have this forked tongue. This forked tongue allows them to process information in terms of directionality. So if like one tip of that tongue has more scent on it than another tip, and let's say they're looking for a mouse or something to eat, they can get a directionality to that scent signal within the environment. A snake processes that scent with a specialized organ called a Jacobson's organ that's located kind of the top roof of its mouth, where it takes that scent into the mouth, processes that, and then gets a better idea of what's within the environment, okay? Now, many snakes don't see well, okay, but they rely primarily on scent to detect their environment. Some snakes can see pretty well, and you can kind of see it if you look at snakes carefully. You can pretty much tell which ones have pretty good eyesight versus which ones that don't. So something like a black racer here, which is one of our kind of largish black colored snakes that we have in Kentucky, have really large eyes. Okay, so these snakes can see their environment really well. They're also using that sense of smell. And this is one species that, if you've ever seen it out in the field, you walk towards it and the snake is gone quickly. And that's because it saw you coming. Okay. Many of our other snakes can't see that. Snakes that see really well, we call them active foragers. So these snakes are going around the environment looking for food to eat. I've seen black racers on hillsides moving along, sticking their head under every nook and cranny, looking for some kind of food item within there. Okay, so we call them active foragers. Things like rough green snakes here with really large eyes are actively foraging for grasshoppers and other invertebrates within bushes and shrubs. But then there's other snakes that we would consider more like sit and wait predators. And so these snakes kind of find a good spot, in the case of timber rattlesnake, within a forest environment, maybe near a log, and it sits there and it waits for a prey item to come by. Okay, they probably determined that's a good spot because they smell some of these prey items like mammals in that area, and coil up and just have patience and wait. Okay, now many of these sit and wait foragers, but not all of them, have heat sensing pits. This is a picture of a cottonmouth from head on. Okay, you can see the eyes here. You kind of see these extra little holes here. These are heat sensing pits. And this allows snakes to get a thermal signature on animals or potential prey items within their environment. We see these in pit vipers. That's why they get their name, pit vipers. So all of our pit vipers here in Kentucky have these heat sensing pits. But we also see it in like boas and pythons as well, where you see modifications of their labial scales allow them to detect a prey item. And so you're getting kind of this heat signature as you see here on this mouse. So it's pretty cool to think that these snakes, they have eyes, vision varies, they have a great sense of smell, and then they're also using heat signatures within their environment. Now, how do snakes capture prey? Okay, so there's a wide variety of different ways. Most snakes detect a prey item, bite it, swallow it. Not too exciting. I'm going to tell you some exciting ways in which snakes capture prey. And the first is that many snakes use lures to capture prey. So this is a juvenile baby copperhead right here. And if you've ever seen one out in the field, you'll notice that they have the typical copperhead shape pattern, these kind of hourglass shapes on its back, russet colored head, but that tip of the tail is like bright green. And so this bright green or kind of fluorescent yellow tail is used as a little lure. So they'll wiggle this thing around in the forest, perhaps attracting a lizard that thinks it's an inchworm or something like that, and the snake can capture that potential prey item that way. There's lots of other snakes that have modifications to their tail. Probably the most startling species, and of course we don't have this here in Kentucky, this is found in the Middle East, but it's the spider-tailed horned viper, and it undergoes what's called caudal luring, similar to that copperhead. But it'll move this tail, this modified tail, along a rock, and it looks exactly like an invertebrate or a spider crawling around. Birds will see this, come down and try to grasp this tail, and the viper will then bite that bird and venomate it, and then have their particular prey. So really cool aspect of caudal luring. You should Google this at some point. There's some really cool videos of the spider-tailed horned viper online catching prey. Okay. This is a little video here of a salt marsh snake. It's in the same group of water snakes that we have here in Kentucky. The species occurs in Florida, and it's used what's called lingual luring. So if I can get this thing to play here. You see this snake in the water, and it's slowly moving its tongue back and forth. The idea here is a fish will see that, think maybe it's a particular food item, and approach very close to the snake. You can see this fish coming closer and closer. Thinks, oh, there's a little worm to eat. The snake grasps it. We see lingual luring both in this water snake group, but we also see it in some adders and some other species throughout the world. Okay. Constriction's a really common type of way snakes can capture potential prey. Remember, these snakes don't have arms or limbs, so they need some way to hold on to the prey. So in this case, it's a Burmese python constricting a great blue heron, which seems like a very dangerous animal to constrict. And you can kind of see the beak here of the heron. Now, how constriction works is these animals bite and grasp first, and then wrap their body around a potential prey item or a prey item. Now, historically, it's always thought that as that animal breathes, the snake it constricts until that animal can't breathe anymore. That animal dies of suffocation. But recently, it's been learned by scientists that actually what happens is the snake, with all its coils wrapped around a potential or a prey item, it can feel where that animal's heart is. It can feel the blood moving through that animal, and they can push all that blood into the heart, causing a massive heart attack essentially, and kill that animal quickly so then they can safely consume it. Okay. So mammals, birds, in some cases, other snakes are constricted. Here's a black king snake here, which is one of our native species here in Kentucky, constricting a copperhead. Now, black king snakes, like a lot of members of their genus, are resistant to the venom of our venomous snakes. And I've seen copperheads bite king snakes. The king snake has no reaction. The king snake grasps onto that copperhead, constricts it, and then eventually swallows it. If you think about it, what fits inside a snake better than another snake? So kind of a perfectly sized food item there. Now, a lot of our snakes, even small snakes, consume invertebrates, and some of them have modifications to their saliva that allows them to safely consume these animals. This is southeastern crown snake, a small fossorial snake we have here in Kentucky. Fossorial means something that spends a lot of time underground. This guy's biting onto a centipede here, putting in some modified saliva, and then we'll consume that centipede. Okay. Here's a picture here of a copperhead consuming a mammal. And of course, copperheads eat a lot of small mammals. They eat a lot of amphibians. And they kind of sometimes during part of the year act as more of a sit and wait forager, waiting for these animals to come to them. But other times of the year, they show a lot of active foraging. And what we're learning about copperheads more and more is they really like to eat cicadas. And I'm sure this year was a great year for copperheads because there are a lot of cicadas out here in May or June. But these animals, as the nymphs move from the ground and start trying to find a tree to climb up, they'll be flicking their tongue. They'll follow these nymphs up the trees and bite and eat them. Sometimes they wait for these nymphs to kind of molt, and they'll eat the freshly molded cicadas. But they seem to really like consuming cicadas as well as mammals and birds. Okay. Many snakes are really dietary specialists, okay, meaning they eat just one or a few different types of prey. The queen snake is a great example of this. This is a snake we have very common here in central Kentucky. It lives along creeks and streams and rivers, and its preferred food item is crayfish. It's probably the only thing they really eat, but they just don't eat any crayfish. They eat freshly molted crayfish. So when a crayfish molts, it puts out a special chemical into the environment to induce that molting. The queen snakes can key in on this kind of chemical underwater, find these freshly molted crayfish, and then consume them. They'll leave crayfish that are not molting. They'll leave them aside and just search for these freshly molted crayfish. Things like hognose snakes really prefer to eat amphibians and seem to really like eating toads. Now, hognose snakes are really cool because they have elongate teeth kind of in the back of their mouth. And when they detect a toad, the first thing a toad will do is kind of fill up with air and make itself seem a little bigger, harder to swallow. Well, the hognose snake will grasp onto that toad, kind of puncture it, deflate it a little bit, and then consume it. Okay, as shown in this picture here. Now, once I found a hognose snake, I could tell it had a food item in it. I was driving along with it in the car, holding it. It threw up that food item. It was onto my knee, actually. It was a toad. I could see the two puncture marks in it. And then the toad started hopping around again. So it must have just captured that food item, but it was pretty cool to see. Okay. Now, of course, a lot of snakes use to capture prey injected venom. And injected venom is just modified saliva. It is toxic and it's injected via the fangs, or in some species through kind of the back teeth. Okay. And there's different types of fangs or injection methods depending on the species. The vipers have these hinged fangs. So all of our pit vipers in Kentucky have these hinged fangs. So as this animal strikes, these fangs become unhinged. And then they're like hypodermic needles going into that potential prey item, and then they inject the venom. Some things like cobras and coral snakes have fixed fangs. That's what you can see pictured here. They're much smaller than the viper fangs, but they still kind of inject venom into these animals. So what does venom do? Well, it immobilizes the prey. And there's various chemical components to venom, and it's quite complicated. But some components are what we call hemotoxic, and this causes like tissue damage, so the rupturing of red blood cells, things like that. And some components of venom are neurotoxic, that makes this animal harder to breathe, harder for the nervous system to kind of work. But there's a lot of different enzymes and components in venom. And it's not just as simple as all vipers have hemotoxin and all coral snakes have neurotoxin. They kind of have a mixture of all of these depending on the species and even what part of the range the species is in and what prey items are within that part of the range. So here's just a picture. Do not try this at home, of hinged fangs seen in a cottonmouth. So you can see that they're pretty good size and serve their purpose for injecting venom into potential prey. So if we kind of recap all of this and we think of how these snakes find food, you have something like a timber rattlesnake that's a sit and wait predator coiled up in some part of the woods, constantly flicking its tongue, sensing for prey within the environment, processing that information through its Jacobson's organ. It also has some vision where it can look around, but probably pretty limited. But it also has the ability to detect heat signals through its pits of where that prey item is. So as they sit kind of probably at night, waiting for something to come by, it comes close, they inject that venom. That venom immediately causes some physiological changes in that potential prey item. Now that prey item may kind of scamper off, but at the same time, it's bleeding from those wounds. Oftentimes it's dribbling urine. Then that snake uses its tongue to follow that scent trail all the way where it finds the prey immobilized, and then it swallows it. So really cool aspects of how these animals without limbs can find prey and successfully forage. Now, snakes eat a lot of different kind of things, as I talked about, from invertebrates all the way up to mammals, but a lot of things really like eating snakes as well. Birds of prey like consuming snakes. Things like red-shouldered hawks really like eating snakes. Other snakes like consuming snakes. Here's a black racer eating a garter snake in somebody's garden, okay? And of course, a lot of mammals like eating snakes. So snakes have all kinds of various predatory mechanisms to avoid getting consumed, because a lot of things really like eating snakes, okay? Now, oftentimes you'll see a snake moving across the road, and it's like, wow, that thing's like pretty conspicuous, right? Here's a copperhead moving across the road at night. Really visual, easy to see, right? You think a predator could just snag this animal off. Remember, this isn't their natural habitat. You put a copperhead in its natural habitat, and this is what we could consider being an animal exhibiting a high level of trypsis. Highly camouflaged, blends in really well with its surrounding. Hard for a predator to determine that this is a snake. They can barely see the outline of this animal in these leaves. And we see this with a lot of species that are kind of boldly marked when we see them out on our driveways or on our porch, but you put them in their natural habitat, and it's really hard for an animal to see that this is a snake and determine that this is an animal that I could eat. See this with rough green snakes as well. Really beautiful emerald colored green snakes that we have throughout Kentucky. Put them in a tree or a bush, they're almost impossible for an animal to see, okay? A lot of snakes have bands. So sometimes these are wrap around the body. Sometimes they go along the sides of the body. And again, you can think like This snake, you know, is pretty conspicuous and on the slab of sandstone here. But you put the snake out in the forest, and all of a sudden these bands kind of break up the general outline of the snake. So if you're thinking of an aerial predator like a bird or a mammal that's looking for this, it's hard for them to see that this is an elongate reptile. It just looks like chunks of you know, or just something that doesn't have that same shape. And we call this disruptive coloration that we see in a lot of snakes. Some snakes will warn predators based on them being dangerous, venomous, distasteful, things like that. Cottonmouths are perfect examples of that. If you approach a cottonmouth, sit there, open its mouth, warn potential predators like, "Hey, don't try to eat me. I'm venomous, and this could be a very bad move for your part." So that's a good warning display. Now, we're all well aware of rattlesnakes and how they warn potential predators that they're there. And then there's a lot of snakes that actually copy that behavior that rattlesnakes have. So like our gray rat snakes, our racers, our king snakes, our milk snakes will all move their tail rapidly when a predator is there. And that's probably to trick the potential predator to think that maybe this is a rattlesnake, maybe I don't want to consume it. We see this is what we would call a type of mimicry, and mimicry has been very much studied in snakes, and it's a very exciting topic. One of the classic examples of mimicry is seen in coral snakes, especially here in the southeastern United States. Now, we don't have any coral snakes here in Kentucky, but you can find them in, you know, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida. Now, we probably all remember the little rhyme here about coral snakes. Red next to yellow, dangerous fellow. Red next to black, venom lack. Okay. We probably all learned this when we were younger. And of course, you can see this picture of a coral snake, which is shares the same family as cobras and sea snakes and things like that. Is venomous, and predators learn to avoid it. But we see all kinds of species kind of mimicking these color patterns that we see in coral snakes. Scarlet king snake, a species we have here in Kentucky. And sometimes you can see a little more yellow. This specimen doesn't have that, but you see these distinct bands on this animal. Red milk snake, a lot of red on this animal, somewhat distinct bands. Even things like a scarlet snake, which is pictured here. All three of these species that I just showed you, besides the coral snake, are native to Kentucky. Distinctive bands. Okay, so why would mimicry persist in Kentucky when the coral snake is not found here? Well, we have to think about what kind of animals like to eat these snakes. And birds may be a really significant predator. And birds, of course, many of them are migratory. So a bird may spend the winter months in places where there's coral snakes, learn to avoid them, spend the summer months in places like Kentucky, still see this pattern, and maybe think, I don't want to try it. Looks like a coral snake and it could be potentially dangerous. Now, the little poem I told you about, red next to black, red next to yellow, it works great for the southeastern United States. It does not work out great for other parts of the world where coral snakes are, okay? So, and there's all kinds of coral snakes and all kinds of species that mimic them, especially in Central and South America, where it shows both mimics and the coral snakes here, all showing these patterns. And in some cases, coral snakes have no red on them as well. This is a coral snake. This is a coral snake mimic. A few years ago, I was in Costa Rica. I saw what looked to be a coral snake moving through a lowland tropical forest. Me and some other researchers took pictures of it, brought those pictures back, did close examination of the scales around the head, and it had some extra scales behind the eye that a coral snake does not have. That was the only distinguishing feature. So it was mimicking that coral snake. We avoided it, took some pictures, but avoided it. And that's how complex the system of mimicry can be. Other species avoid predators by just getting weird, okay? Hognose snakes are a great example, species we have here in Kentucky. If you encounter a hognose snake in the field, the first thing it'll do is it'll hood up like a cobra, it'll hiss, it'll strike, but usually with its mouth closed, okay? If you keep harassing that hognose snake, it'll make itself all kinds of stinky and gross by spreading musk and feces all over its body. Sometimes it'll throw up whatever it last ate. If you continue to harass this hog-nosed snake, it'll roll over on its back, open its mouth, and play dead. And the idea here is a potential predator sees this and says, there's something really wrong with this animal. Maybe I should avoid it and look for some food elsewhere. So really significant, cool anti-predatory mechanism. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, prey and predators and snakes, because I think it adds to the appreciation of these animals. I'll spend a few minutes talk about like snake ID here in Kentucky. So in Kentucky, we have 33 different species. They're found throughout the state. We have 29 non-venomous species and only 4 species of venomous snakes here in Kentucky. When it comes to overall species richness, like the number of species across Kentucky and in the different regions of Kentucky, this part of far western Kentucky, called the Jackson Purchase or Mississippian Bayment, has pretty high species richness of snakes. And we tend to see quite a few different species kind of in some parts of central Kentucky and the eastern coal fields as well. The inner bluegrass, where Lexington is located, generally has the fewest species of snakes present. Now, there's some kind of tricks that work okay in the field if you're trying to determine if something is venomous or not venomous. I would just say that even venomous species, if they're kind of left alone, you can usually take a picture and ID it later. You don't have to look at all these features, but some good field techniques are with some non-venomous Kentucky species, or they tend to have a round pupil, okay? They tend to have more kind of a thin neck and an overall thinner head than venomous species. But of course, there are some non-venomous species like water snakes that when you encounter them may like flatten out their head a little bit to make you think that it's more kind of heart-shaped like a venomous species. So snakes will try to trick you, though you can still see the round pupil on this one. Venomous species in Kentucky have more of a vertical pupil. They have these heat-sensing pits. Here's the pit, here's the nostril. Like I said, there's 4 species. They have kind of a broader, bigger head, and that's just because they have venom glands located in the back of the head. But like I said before, a lot of snakes mimic that. So those are just some good techniques, but of course, some of these require you to kind of carefully look at these animals. But I think with most people's cell phones and other cameras, you can get a pretty good picture of the snake without disturbing it and ID it later. I teach my students in class other ways to identify snakes. There are some species that have very smooth scales across their body. These things like king snakes and worm snakes. There's other species that have keeled scales that give them a little more rougher appearance, like water snakes and garter snakes. So we can take a look at their scales closely. We can take a look at what's called the anal plate or the anal scale. And some species have a single scale, and underneath this is their cloaca, where they, dispose of waste, and their copulatory organs are located there too. Some species have a divided anal plate, and then some species have undivided, what we call subcaudal scales located beneath that cloacal plate. And other species have paired. So these are just some other characteristics to look at. But again, it kind of requires you having the snake in hand. So I thought, without going through all those details, I'd just tell you a little bit about some of our venomous species, some of our more common species that we have here in Kentucky. So when it comes to the venomous species, the most common venomous species in Kentucky is the northern copperhead, which you can see from this map above. It's pretty much found statewide. It's pretty uncommon in the bluegrass region, although we do get a lot of records around the Palisades, along the Kentucky River. But elsewhere, it's very common in places like Land Between the Lakes and most of eastern Kentucky. Now, the common feature of the copperhead to look at are the kind of what we call the dorsal or back coloration, where it has these hourglass shaped patterns along the back. It's kind of a heavy bodied, a little bit thicker snake with larger, oftentimes russet colored head. Oftentimes when you encounter copperheads in the wild, especially during the day, they're just going to sit tight, sit really close. And that's a good time to take a picture of one. At night, especially in the summer months, they tend to be more nocturnal and be on the move. And this is when people encounter them a lot, like moving across roads or through their yard, things like that. Like I said before, juvenile or young copperheads have this bright yellow tail tip. But again, copperhead, most common venomous species in Kentucky that you could probably really see anywhere throughout the state. The next one is the western cottonmouth that is only found in western Kentucky. You can see this map here. These are records and the yellow dots collected over the years. You can see it has quite a restricted range. They do not occur in central Kentucky or eastern Kentucky unless someone has released one there. They just don't naturally occur. These are snakes of swamps, bottomland hardwood forests, often found along creeks and streams. And they have a very characteristic display when approached by a predator or a human, where they open their mouth and gape, showing the inside white of that mouth, giving them their common name, cottonmouth. The juveniles look different than the adults. The adults are oftentimes uniform, like black or gray or brown in coloration. The juveniles are kind of heavily patterned, but again, they have that yellow tail tip, similar to a copperhead. Okay. A lot of people confuse northern water snakes with cottonmouths. Okay. And northern water snakes can be quite variable. One thing to keep in mind with all these animals, though, if you're in eastern Kentucky and you see something like this along a creek, it's going to be a water snake. It's not going to be a cottonmouth, and because cottonmouths just don't occur there. Another characteristic that people oftentimes use to differentiate a cottonmouth from like a water snake is cottonmouths oftentimes swim with their head elevated above the water. So they're moving through the environment that way, where a water snake will just kind of dive underneath the water and swim underneath it. The third venomous species is the timber rattlesnake. As you can see, the timber rattlesnake is found throughout eastern Kentucky, in the Knobs region of Kentucky, a little bit in the western coal fields, land between the lake. This snake is generally rare where people have really kind of modified the environment. So heavily agricultural regions, we don't see this. Heavily urban regions, we don't see this. Farms, we tend to don't see timber rattlesnakes very much. This is an animal like that is truly associated with like forests and kind of wilderness areas. But it's our largest venomous species in the state. Many of them have rattles, but my experience with timber rattlesnakes in Kentucky is you really have to agitate an animal to get it to rattle. I've been standing very close to timber rattlesnakes and almost stepping on them, and they won't rattle. They're relying on crypsis and camouflage to blend in with the environment, and they don't really have an interest in wasting that venom, which is so important to capture prey on a potential predator. That being said, you don't need to handle timber rattlesnakes. If you were to get envenomated, you need to have somebody take you to the hospital and deal with it there. Okay. The final venomous species that we have is the pygmy rattlesnake, a little tiny rattlesnake found right in the LBL region. One of the rarest snakes we have here in Kentucky. As you can see, this is a young one next to a quarter, but they don't really get that much larger. Their rattle sounds like kind of a buzzing of an insect. And there just aren't a whole lot of encounters of this snake people in Kentucky. But those are our 4 venomous species. Now, we have lots of non-venomous species throughout Kentucky. We have many small woodland snakes, like worm snakes, earth snakes, red-bellied snakes, and ringneck snakes, and sometimes they can be super abundant. These are not dangerous to people. They generally eat invertebrates or small salamanders, and they rarely ever bite when they're picked up. Some of our larger non-venomous species that people tend to see are things like gray rat snakes, which you can see are found statewide. They can get to pretty large size, 4 or 5 feet. The state record is 7 feet 1 inch on a gray rat snake. So one of the largest snakes we have in Kentucky. When they're young, they're heavily patterned. When they're older, they kind of lose that pattern, but there's tremendous amounts of variability in gray rat snakes' colors. Some have a lot of yellow and oranges in them. Others are more mottled. Others are completely black. So there can be quite a degree of variation. Another largish snake that people tend to see are king snakes, and actually people often like king snakes even if they don't like other snakes, because they do eat snakes, including venomous ones. And these have smooth scales, so it gives them kind of a glossy appearance. Lots of times a little white or yellow flecking along the back, more white or along the lip area or labial scales, and then kind of a checkerboard pattern on the belly. These are all pictures of black king snakes. This one's really pretty from Western Kentucky, but we see a lot of variability in these guys as well. The black racer is another species that we commonly find in Kentucky. Now, these snakes oftentimes flee when you come close to them. They're super fast, and they tend to prefer like shrubby areas, grassy areas, kind of the edge between forest and open areas. Really good eyesight on black racers, and they tend to move fairly quickly, like I said. When they're young, they're heavily patterned. When they're old, they're dark in coloration. Two more species I like to talk about: the northern water snake, another really common species found near any body of water in Kentucky. These get to maybe 3 feet long, pretty heavily bodied, like to eat amphibians, like to eat fish. Sometimes they're pretty boldly patterned, like these individuals. Sometimes they can be a lot more light brown, especially in Western Kentucky, and sometimes they can be quite dark. This here's a picture of two males courting a female. And water snakes are extremely tough, resilient animals. This one has an injury on the side, looked like it has quite the parasite load coming out of it as well. And these males are still interesting in courting this female who was captured sometime later and it completely healed from these wounds. And finally, we'll talk about the common garter snake, really common throughout Kentucky, has these lateral stripes along the side of the body, sometimes a little checker mark. This is the most common snake you'll see in urban and suburban areas. And often this is the first snake that comes out of hibernation in the springtime. So sometimes we see them in like late February. And sometimes they persist on the surface through November, early December as well. Kind of a boldly patterned snake here. Sometimes they have a little bit of orange on them as well. I think the final thing I'll just talk about is to ID snakes. We have a great resource, here at University of Kentucky. It's a Kentucky Snake ID site where you can either put in features of snakes that you can see, and it can give you some possibilities, or you can search through images of different snake species, and maybe it can help you identify it. I'm always interested in hearing from people that have find snakes. I love to see pictures. Both me and then folks on the extension team can help you with identifying snakes if you can't quite find the identity of your snakes using this resource. So I think at that, and to give enough time, I'll stop my presentation. And after and I can hang around here for a little bit to answer questions at the end of the hour.
Good job. Awesome. Thank you so much. I knew there was a lot of snakes, but I didn't know there was that much, variability in all of them. It's like, so if you don't really know, you shouldn't play with them. Probably.
Yeah,
if you don't know what you're doing.
Usually they let you get close enough where you can take a pretty good picture, and you should never pick up anything that you don't know what it is. And that's just a good rule. Yeah.
Good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Oh, very insightful. That was very fascinating, really. I've learned so much about snakes that I did not know. So, yeah, Dr. Price, thank you so much for taking the time and helping us celebrate World Snake Day during World Snake Week as part of World Snake Year.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate all you do for us. Thank you, sir, very much.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, good stuff, man. Wow.
Wow, that was awesome. So moving on, though, we have Laurie Thomas, who's going to give us a new tree of we used to call it tree of the week.
Right. Now it's more like tree of the month, but still you can view it as tree of the week. You can pick a different one each week. So we could still be a tree of the week. That was a fantastic presentation. I sat through the whole thing. This was so interesting. I really enjoyed it.
So what tree are we going to be talking about?
So today we are wrapping up the oaks. We have now done videos for all of the oaks. This was our last one that we'll do, and this is the water oak. So you can check it out.
Okay, awesome.
Get her going.
I'm Laurie Thomas from the University of Kentucky Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, and I'm here with the tree of the week, the water oak. Water oak, Quercus nigra, sometimes called possum oak or spotted oak. It is a member of the red oak group. It is a deciduous, fast-growing, and short-lived tree, and it commonly lives about 60 to 80 years of age. Trees typically grow 50 to 80 feet tall and up to 3 feet in diameter, and they tend to have a conical to broad, rounded crown with a straight main trunk that can often have a fair amount of epicormic branching. Water oak looks similar to willow oak and shingle oak. In the deep south, it can sometimes be evergreen. It has been used as a shade tree in southern communities, and its flowers and fruit provide food for wildlife. Water oak is native to the eastern and south-central United States. It is found in all the coastal states from New Jersey to Texas and inland as far as Oklahoma, Kentucky, and southern Missouri. In Kentucky, it can be found in several western and southern counties. It grows on a range of sites from wet bottomlands to well-drained moist uplands. And water oak's best growth is on better drained silty clay or loamy type soils of high flats and ridges of alluvial stream bottoms. Water oak is classified as shade intolerant and does not compete well with other species. Water oak is deciduous with alternately arranged leaves. The leaves may remain on the tree until midwinter. The leaves are simple in form, usually about 2 to 4 inches long and extremely variable in shape. They can be spatulate to lanceolate and have no lobes or up to 5 lobes. The margins are entire, but lobes have bristle tips like other red oaks. The surface is smooth and the underside of the leaf may have rusty colored hairs along the leaf's main veins. The leaves are green to bluish green during the growing season, and autumn color is brown to copper. Water oak is monoecious, meaning a tree has both male and female reproductive structures. The male or staminate flowers are in hanging catkins that are produced near the tip of the previous year's growth, and that's the photo on the left. The female or the pistillate flowers are small, short stalk clusters at the junction of the current year's growth, the photo on the right. They both develop shortly before or just as the leaves emerge, and the flowers are wind pollinated. The fruit is a small acorn that's about a ½ inch long with a flattened cap that covers close to a third of the acorn. The acorns may be arranged in pairs or single on the stem. The color tends to be very dark to almost black. They mature during the second growing season in the fall, and the acorns are disseminated by wind, water, and wildlife. The bark of water oak when it's young is dark in color and tight and smooth. As the tree ages, the bark develops irregular rough patches, and the color begins to lighten to gray. Those irregular patches continue to develop into wide, scaly ridges with age. Water oak wood is regarded as weaker in comparison to most oaks. Red oaks, such as water oak, do not have the level of decay and rot resistance that white oak possesses, and durability should be considered minimal. Water oak wood is used for timber and fuel, and its veneer has been used for fruit and vegetable containers, and it's been widely planted in southern communities as a shade tree. Water oak, like other oaks, is an important tree species for wildlife. Oaks are one of the top 10 trees for wildlife, according to the National Wildlife Federation. Water oak acorns are an important food source for white-tailed deer, eastern gray squirrel, raccoons, mallard, wood duck, and bobwhite quail, just to name a few. The buds and twigs provide winter browse for deer, and water oak is also the host plant for the larvae of the imperial moth, as well as numerous butterflies, including hair streaks and dusky wings. The national champion water oak, as of 2024, is in Fayette County, Tennessee. It's 253 inches in circumference, 99 feet tall, with a 101-foot crown spread. The Kentucky champion is at Kentucky Dam Village State Resort Park. It is 217 inches in circumference, 90 feet tall, with a 108-foot crown spread. If you'd like to know more about champion trees, check out the national champion kentuckytrees.org website or check out Kentucky Champion Trees at the Kentucky Division of Forestry. Now for a few fun facts about water oak. The name water oak refers to its leaf shape. The top lobe looks as if a drop of water is hanging from the end of the leaf. Water oak is also sometimes called possum oak because possum are known to eat the acorns. According to the American Heritage Trees, one of Helen Keller's favorite trees that she often wrote about was a water oak that is still alive at her home in Tuscumbia, Alabama. The genus name Quercus is the Latin name for the oak trees, and the specific epithet nigra is Latin for black, referring to the dark appearance of the tree's canopy and the blackish color of the acorns. Thanks for joining me to learn about the water oak. I hope you get the opportunity to get out into your woodland, a local park, or your neighborhood and enjoy the beautiful trees of Kentucky.
Well, thank you, Lori. That was a really great presentation on that. I was getting ready to say, hey, why do they call them possum? But you said that. But I could see why people would plant them because, they're very spread out and, could be a big tree for a shade tree. I could see why that would work.
Right, and they are fast-growing trees, so to get something in a spot, you might want some shade, and that's why in the South it's been planted quite a bit. It is a fast-growing tree, but it's not long-lived. And again, like we always say, if we're thinking about planting, you want to put the right tree in the right place. So
at first, when you said water oak, I thought, oh, these are going to be beside streams and rivers and things like that.
They are, but yes, they're pretty. They have a wider range, but yes, and they're found there as well. So.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much.
So many oaks. Yes, thank you, Laurie. Yes, so many oaks. Gosh.
Yeah, there's a lot of oaks.
Yeah, so if y'all want to take a deep dive, get on to Common Trees in Kentucky. You can look at all the different oaks that Laurie's done. It's an impressive feat. Very cool show today, Renee.
I know. Snake. We got that.
Picked up a new tree of the week. Good stuff. Yeah,
it was really good. And we appreciate you all joining us because we wouldn't be doing this show if it wasn't for you. So if you have ideas, let us know. You can go to fromthewoodstoday.com and submit any kind of show topic. We've done several show ideas from people just like you who are viewing and saying, hey, I want to know more about whatever XYZ, and we go and try to find an expert on that.
Yeah, no doubt. Because if you're wondering about it, there's a good chance somebody else is as well. So yeah, let's help everybody out.
Yeah, and you can binge watch us all for days if you wanted to, months probably, at fromthewoodstoday.com because every show we've ever done is right there. And if you want to see this snake show again, because you're seeing something, you're like, ooh, is that venomous or not? I need to remember what that is. By next week, this one will be on fromthewoodstoday.com as well.
Yeah, so check us out. Let us know what we can do to help you all in the future. And thanks again for being part of From the Woods Today.
Yeah. Y'all take care. See you next week. Bye.
Bye, all.
From the woods today. From the woods today.